Gen Z is not having sex.
What happened to hello? How are you? My name is.
At least, not as much as young adults of past generations. According to the General Social Survey, the amount of young adults who reported having no sex within a year before being surveyed has nearly doubled in the past 15 years. And funnily enough, this figure is actually called a hockey stick curve. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Dubbed the sex recession, surely no coincidence that this is happening alongside the other recession right now, many have been quick to point fingers as to what might be making Gen Z so celibate. One writer theorizes Gen Z is so terminally online, so addicted to pathologizing normality through therapy speak, and speeding so far to political extremes that they've lost their ability to navigate the nuances of human relationships. Further addled by the isolation of the pandemic, they've thrown their hands up and escaped back into their bedroom bunkers alone, their faces aglow with blue light. In other words, Gen Z is too woke and too on they phone for good old-fashioned intercourse. This is a condescending and generalizing description, primarily functioning to reinstate a view of Gen Z from older generations rather than thoughtfully investigating the cause of the issue. This author isn't completely wrong though. I genuinely do believe that chronically online discourse and pandemic-induced high screen times could be big contributors to real-life abstinence. Obviously, why or why not members of a demographic choose to have sex is a very complicated personal decision that cannot be explained through generalized statistic. Instead, I believe the sex recession concerns more than just not having sex. Rather, it's the way that young people think, feel, and talk about sex that is changing here. And yes, like the author lamented, much of these conversations do happen in chronically online echo chambers. But that doesn't make these viewpoints and attitudes towards sexuality any less impactful, valuable, or worth investigating. And in terms of who is having these discussions of sex and sexuality online, it is necessary to note that it is largely young women voicing discomforts with sex, for very understandable reasons. This past year especially, I've noticed an increasingly popular rhetoric which seems to pose all expressions of heterosexuality as power imbalanced and potentially violent acts of objectification against women. Even women who present themselves in a risque, sexually embodied manner are accused of promoting this dangerous objectification, promoting patriarchal ideals, and/or objectifying themselves. Exhibit A, of course, is the cultural response to Sabrina Carpenter's Man's Best Friend album cover image, which I made my very first video essay on. Check it out, hint, hint. I've also seen this Twitter exchange going around lately, and I think it so perfectly sums up this conflict. A woman shared, "My boyfriend got a third monitor," alongside an image of a 3-monitor setup, 2 screens showing selfies of her, and the third centermost screen displaying an image of her cleavage. To which someone replied, "There's literally nothing in heterosexual relationships except men objectifying women and calling it love." To which someone else replied, bravely, "If I had a boyfriend, I would want him to think I'm hot." It's easy to characterize this discourse as typical Gen Z wokeness, mindlessly adopting radical ideas because someone online told them to. But I don't think what's happening here is actually an angry fight against sex at all. I think it's a confused fear of having to become a woman under a patriarchy that is unrelenting and not going anywhere anytime soon. The nature of American feminism has undergone an incredibly bleak reality check over the past decade, with huge political setbacks and cultural shifts towards conservatism stomping over the efforts of our pink-hatted marching millennial foremothers. Gen Z women are coming of age within this vast disillusionment, left with complicated and contradictory pieces. We know things like objectification bad, men objectify, but we haven't quite figured out what to do with it all yet. We know that parts of sex are bad, but social media framing has reproduced, diluted, and distorted these ideas so much that some have come around to simply believe all sex is the worst of it, exploitative, pornographic, perverse. But I believe this rhetoric, spawned by very valid fears, reinforces an idea that sex is something only desired and controlled by men, when it doesn't have to be. Obviously, young women still have natural sexual desires of their own, which are indeed very difficult to express and navigate within these complex systems of gender and power. Is there an outlet for these desires? Yes. In some weird way, it seems like a departure from this virtual sex recession is taking the form of, for lack of better words, collective gooning over a show about gay hockey players. Enter Heated Rivalry. If you clicked and have made it this far, I'm assuming you're already quite familiar with Heated Rivalry, a Canadian series that follows a years-long clandestine sexual turned romantic relationship between professional hockey players Shane Hollander and Ilya Rozanov. The series, created by showrunner Jacob Tierney, is an adaptation of a book of the same name by author Rachel Reed. Interestingly, Heated Rivalry is the second book in a series. The events of the first, Game Changer, which follows another closeted player, Scott Hunter, are sprinkled in throughout the season. To be honest, when I first heard of the show and knew little about it, my expectations for it were rather low. It sounded very, shall we say, Wattpad-y, and I don't mean this in a wholly bad way. Books of this specific smutty romance genre are great in book form, and the whole book talk phenomenon is a good outlet against the tabooness of female sexuality, which I discussed earlier. However, it's screen adaptations of these kinds of books which have given the genre a bad rep in recent years. Think the Kissing Booth and After series. Even Red, White, and Royal Blue, which was a step up in quality, didn't hit quite as much as its source material. But Heated Rivalry completely impressed me on all fronts, not just as a book-to-screen adaptation, but as a television show in general, especially at a time when new streaming series are being pumped out every week, clearly with little care given to the quality of the show so long as people watch it. As someone who feels like an adult iPad baby these days with all the short-form content I consume, Heated Rivalry completely captures my attention. It's captivating and paced incredibly well, thanks in part to the source material's already strong beats, a refreshing break from the recent sea of bloated, hour-long streaming episodes where nothing seems to happen. The shots themselves look sleek, cinematic, and sexy, especially in comparison to victims of the great color grading epidemic of 2020 cinema. The show's leads, played by breakout stars Hudson Williams and Connor Story, are perfect choices, and so much care and compassion is clearly put into their performances. And of course, there is the sex, an important and defining feature of the show. The first erotic scene occurs about 14 minutes in. The first 2 episodes alone contain 5 sex scenes and then some, and at least on my channels of social media, the sex of Heated Rivalry seems to be all anyone, including myself, is talking about right now. But looking at a year's worth of sex and gender discourse in retrospect, this is a little surprising to me, considering the movement against a lot of sexually explicit media from young women online. Is this show generating a completely different response solely because it's 2 guys having sex? Well, yes, no, maybe so. First, on a more straightforward level, the sex in Heated Rivalry is explicit without being gratuitous. In scenes carefully overseen by intimacy coordinator Shala Hunter, I think most viewers can quickly gather the purpose the sex serves, and believe it or not, its explicitness is even pared back from the source material. To throw some more strays at the TV industry right now, it seems like media is dead set on telling you things, like what characters are doing and why, or what the central themes are. But Heated Rivalry functions in the opposite way, and the unfortunately lost art of showing rather than telling. The plot is not laid out in dialogue, but progresses gradually through gazes, tension, what isn't being said. The sex scenes further this to build a romance, as each sexual encounter transforms the characters in some subtle ways that might not be known to them, but are clear to the audience. But beyond their function and purpose, the sex scenes are just sexy and romantic, something which many women viewers are in agreement on. This fact, of course, has created discourse of its own. Is this fetishization of gay men? If so, is that by nature a bad thing? Well, I'm actually not someone who can appropriately answer these questions, so I'm not going to. And I completely understand and respect those who have reason to feel put off. But if I may, I do feel like this back and forth on the matter of fetishization, as well as other popular discourses surrounding the show, such as speculation around the actors' sexualities, are sort of red herrings, I guess. I think there are deeper questions to be asked, not just is it good or bad that women are obsessed with this homoerotic show, but rather why are women obsessed with this homoerotic show? And that is something I can try to answer. Of course, why any one viewer enjoys this show is incredibly personal. Women viewers are not a monolith, and so on. You get the gist. But I don't just have one answer as to why this demographic is so drawn to the show. There's many. There's layers. And if there's layers to something, why not make a fun little graphic? Behold my iceberg. It works too because like ice, that hockey that they're skating on the ice. Get it? Anyways, hopefully this will help me explain the way heated rivalry exists within the culture and why women are so receptive to it at this particular moment. At the tip, of the iceberg, we have the literal content of the show. It's sort of denotative meaning. Two male hockey players having sex and falling in love. At its most basic level, the premise of the show is effective in its irony and juxtaposition, not just homosexuality in the world of hockey, but romance and vulnerability in the world of male sports. It's a common joke online that the actual scenes in which Shane and Ilya play hockey are like 2 seconds long. And in their most intimate moments, we almost forget the hockey aspect, just as the characters might too. But these scenes often don't linger too long before we are reminded of the sport and all the pressures that come along with it. So their homosexual romance is of course erotic and exciting in the forbidden thrill of it all, but it's also rare to see masculine athleticism and tender romance portrayed in the same vein at all. In this sense, this section of the iceberg functions as a sort of hopeful fantasy for the female viewer. What if these masculine spaces were actually sites of tenderness and vulnerability? Going deeper, into the iceberg, we have the sort of vessel for this story. How is it being presented and by whom? It's here that I must discuss the collaboration between the minds of author Rachel Reed, a queer woman, and Jacob Tierney, a gay man. The identities of these creators are brought up a lot in online discourse, usually as a sort of defense against the fetishization argument, with people saying things like, oh, well, the showrunner and the author are both queer and therefore... But again, I think there's more to that. This might sound a little out there, so bear with me, but I think the transference of the story from Reed to Tierney is one of the many ways the show actually transcends the barriers of gender and sexuality. It is definitely important to recognize the show as a feat in positive representation for gay men, and I don't mean to take away from that. However, it's impossible to credit solely Tierney or solely Reed for the effectiveness of any one moment in the show. It's the wild imagination of a female romance writer and the precise personal insight of a gay director working together that makes the magic here, as well as the actors, the intimacy coordinator, and the below-the-line creatives of the show, some of whom, according to the internet, are queer as well. This beautiful vision of women and gay men supporting one another is also heavily reflected in the lovely women characters in this show and their relationships to the leads, as if to show the strength of this collaboration in action. The content of the show and the nature of Shane and Ilya's relationship also further deconstructs such gender divides. While one is typically more dominant in the relationship, they both shed their masculinity emotionally in intimate scenes while still appearing as perfectly chiseled images of men. Many women enjoy this dynamic from a voyeuristic standpoint, but some viewers online, as well as friends of mine, have shared that they enjoy the relationship between Shane and Ilya because they can imagine themselves in either role at different times. With typical gender and sexual roles broken down, both the characters and the viewer can negotiate their identities across these lines. And finally, we're brought to the bottom of the iceberg, the audience and what the show represents in the real world of the audience. Of course, in the vein of transcending barriers, I don't think this show is made exclusively for women or for queer men. In interview, showrunner Jacob Tierney acknowledges the important representational strides his show is making for his own community, while also remaining well aware that many women will be watching the show, because of the largely female readership of the source material and the largely female audience for romance books and shows in general. He states romance is something that mainly women consume, so it's not given the same level of discourse, but it's been amazing to see audiences come together around these books. Rachel's works are queer, I'm queer, the show is queer, but one of the things that made it viable in terms of viewership was the baked-in female audience. And I think it is so evident that Tierney took this large viewer base of women seriously in the creation of the show. Putting our iceberg together, the show is a story of two male hockey players having sex and falling in love, told through the converging lenses of two creators of distinct queer identities, partially consumed by young women who are exhausted and jaded by conventional gender expectations. The show is emerging in a landscape where content that depicts women's sexuality often feels degrading and uncomfortable. At the end of the day, Heated Rivalry reveals the constraints of patriarchy and heteronormativity, something women might know a thing or two about and can identify with even if we don't share exact identities with the characters. According to one viewer interviewed by Cosmopolitan, I feel like gay media hits women like me so hard because it depicts a relationship where all parties involved are treated equally. Women in heterosexual relationships are so used to being devalued by their partner, and their sexual pleasure isn't always prioritized. At a time when any kind of heterosexual content feels automatically loaded and can be assumed to inherently put the women in a position of inferiority, it makes perfect sense that women viewers crave an entirely different script altogether. In fictional gay romances, these power imbalances are often not part of the equation, allowing the sex and romance to feel much more authentic and pleasurable for both parties. Quite simply, amidst a never-ending onslaught of morally dubious displays of heterosexuality, I think it's beautiful that every once in a while, something like Heated Rivalry comes along and women discover a horniness that doesn't make them feel at least a little bit icky inside. Whatever your specific reason may be for enjoying this show, I think it's safe to say Heated Rivalry has given us all a bit of a wake-up call. Is it the answer to all of our problems? Obviously not, but is it a reminder of how exciting, high-quality weekly television shows can be? Is it giving us new ways of thinking about sex on our screens? I think yes. Alright, that's all for me. I hope you're all enjoying the Heated Rivalry finale right now. I am in the past and have yet to watch it as I'm making this because it's not out yet, but I plan to post this after it airs, so future me is probably gagging and really enjoying it too. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. There's a lot of content on Heated Rivalry out there right now, so as always, I've got some sources and recommended viewing and reading linked in the caption below. If you like this video, check out my others and like and subscribe and stay tuned for the next one and all of that. Yay! Okay, cool. Bye!